Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting. Today we have one item on our agenda, and do any of the committee members have any statements before I ask Ms. Wellens to lead us through the packet, please? I guess I should mention what the one item on the agenda is, and that's Bill 1422, which is the Police Private Security Camera Incentive Program established. And we're also going to be joined by Councilmember Rice. He was here earlier, but I don't see him right now.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
You were there, all right. So a good thing I didn't say anything beyond that, isn't it? My goodness. Welcome, Councilmember Rice. And with that, unless you, Councilmember Rice, do you have an opening statement?
Sure, if I could, just very briefly. I
Please.
just wanted to say the reason and the impetus for this bill was after the unfortunate Jalen Jones murder in Germantown. And as we were talking with both the police department and with Jalen's mother, it became very clear that it was difficult for us to find out what had happened because of the challenges facing not having a lot of security cameras in the area, which oftentimes police may utilize to help solve some of these crimes. It was at that point that we started doing research, found out that the District of Columbia had an incentivization program to make sure that we had security cameras in areas that were priority areas. We know that Germantown, unfortunately, has been the place of numerous crimes, especially when it comes to gun violence. And so in response to our community and trying to keep our communities of color safe, it was incredibly important for us to make sure that we did something like this. We understand that Ring cameras and many of the like are readily available across the county, and many utilize them. But we know that in some of our more socioeconomically impacted communities, they may not purchase them because of the prohibitive costs. And so from that standpoint, incentivizing folks to be able to use them to protect the victims of crimes, which are oftentimes the majority people of color, is incredibly important to us. And so from that standpoint, that's why we introduced this bill.
Thank you very, very much. And I did want to welcome Chief Jones here as well. Chief Jones seems to spend more time here than he would like, I think, but it's always good to see you, Chief. And with that, Ms. Wellens, will you lead us through, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. And in addition to Chief Jones, we have Dr. Bonner Tompkins is here as well to answer any questions the committee may have. Bill 1422 would establish a private security camera incentive program within the Montgomery County Police Department. An individual or business would be able to apply to MCPD in order to receive a voucher or rebate to offset the cost of a security camera on the individual's or business's private property. The property would have to be within a priority area designated by the chief, and the bill would define priority area as one or more police districts identified by the chief as needing additional security cameras based upon public safety indicators, including crime levels. At the public hearing, you heard testimony from several individuals and organizations, including the NAACP and the Greater Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce. The NAACP had a number of insightful comments and suggestions for the committee's consideration, and also suggestions for MCPD when it crafts regulations to implement this program. So I am on page 2 of the staff packet, the first issue for the committee's consideration. And what you see here is a potential amendment, and this was based upon the input from NAACP, a potential amendment to indicate that any security cameras purchased under this program, that the applicant would have to agree in writing that the security camera would not be used for the purpose of recording private property not owned by the applicant. In other words, you know, there would certainly be incidental, like the capturing of other people's private property, no doubt, but that should not be the purpose of the county-funded camera. That was the first issue for potential consideration.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the way that you just said it, but, I mean, we have a Ring at my home, and obviously you do see beyond your own yard. And as an example, I can see my neighbor, the outside of my neighbor's house, but now, I don't know, that would be allowed at that point, the way that this is written? I mean, obviously, we didn't go through the county to buy it, but would that be allowed the way that this is written?
That would be the intent. No, that's a great question, Mr. Chair. That would certainly be the intent, and perhaps it could be borne out more through regulation to say, that was the object of the language, to say that it's not used for the purpose of recording private camera. What we're really would be trying to avoid is, someone, focusing in on their neighbor's window, peering into their kitchen or whatnot, as opposed to the incidental capturing that you're describing with the Ring camera of your neighbor's front door.
Now, I think that if we could write it in such a way that would be clear, I think that is right. And as just an aside, we had last week, a couple of weeks ago, one of my neighbors had come across and asked whether or not because somebody was trying to get into his vehicle, whether or not it was, he could see her ring to see if it was on there. So, we should write it so that the purpose of this is to make an area safer. Yeah. Okay. Is that it? And Chief and Dr. Bynner-Tompkins, I know neither one of you were shy, so if you would please, if you have a comment, please let me know or just jump in, please. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Williams, I know you're not shy either. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second issue relates to the notice of patrons, so to the extent that these cameras are being used in a business. This potential amendment would clarify that there must be a notice posted prominently to alert visitors of the existence of the security camera.
Is that a requirement of if someone did not get funds from the county now, is that a requirement?
I know that you would have to do it if you were doing an audio recording. I don't believe so for video.
Okay, my only concern is that if it's a requirement now, that we have the same requirement that we have now, that we don't have a different requirement for if they buy something under the county program.
Yeah, very good point, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I don't believe that there is a requirement to do so now, with the exception of if you're recording audio.
Okay.
But I can certainly verify that for you.
Please,
sir.
just to be on the safer
Absolutely.
side. But okay. Any other comment on that? Nope. Okay. We're moving right along here.
The next issue noted for your potential consideration around page 4 of the staff packet, issue number 3, the publication of priority areas. This potential amendment would clarify that the chief would be required to publish where the priority areas are, and I assume the chief would do so in any case, but this would make that an explicit requirement.
Okay. Is that fine?
Yes, good afternoon to the committee. And Mr. Chair, I would note that, it's very common for us to communicate with communities to make sure they are aware of crime activity in their particular communities, and in particular higher crime areas where we may have some focus on certain types of crimes that are occurring. And so we would be more than willing. I mean, I don't think that's an issue at all about where the cameras are located, as far as us saying which areas are focused for these types of cameras, where the needs are. And we've had examples of that in recent months, to be quite frank, when we had high crime occurring in the central business district of the Silver Spring. And we provided some additional cameras in those areas, and we made it known, in those communities that and I think that's had some impact, because we've seen some impact of that program moving forward. So I think that will be very fruitful.
I think we're all in agreement with that as well.
Thank you. So is that without objection, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next issue noted in the staff packet, issue number 4, relates to the regulatory framework for implementing the bill, and the NAACP had noted that there are a number of subject matters that would be appropriate for the regulations to implement this security camera program. And the Greater Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce also favored guidance on how camera footage would be monitored or used by MCPD. So based upon those comments, there's a potential amendment for you that would change the regulations under the bill from being permissible to being mandatory. In other words, the chief would have to promulgate regulations. They would be method 2, and the regulations would have to address, at a minimum, they would have to address the methodology used to identify a priority area, the permissible collection, dissemination, use, and disposal of images recorded by a security camera purchased under the program, and minimum standards for security cameras purchased under the program.
And Chief, do you have any concerns with that?
No, I have no concerns. I mean, I just want to make it clear to the committee that, you know, first and foremost, these cameras would not be monitored real time, whether they're a residential camera or whether they are attached to a business. You know, if there could be the potential that if we had, which we don't have currently, but we're working towards having more of a sort of a violent crime center that allows us to be able to really kind of focus on violent crimes, and that if, you know, you had the ability to focus in on a live feed in real time, that would be pretty much the only time, but it would not be monitored 24/7, first and foremost because we don't have the personnel available to do that. And second of all, I think that, again, when you look at the focus of a wide variety of other things that go on throughout the entire county, not one specific area would be targeted unless it's really, and we would pretty much be transparent and note what is the focus of the cameras we're viewing that are, that would, so people would understand this is the purpose for us actually viewing the footage of this particular incident. Anytime we really actually are, when you say collecting or disseminating, first and foremost, it is through the permission of the owners of the camera. They have the ability to tell us that that we have the permission to have that information. And even with that, you know, we may, if need be, we may provide them with a court subpoena should it need be held for evidence for the support of any investigation. But beyond that, you know, we would not be collecting just for the sake of storage data or film collection or video or images just for the sake of having it for, you know, for no specific law enforcement reason.
Okay. You know, it's amazing how many cameras in a variety of forms, and body-worn cameras, everybody's cell phone camera, and when we can start this list going, from what we have today than what we had just a couple of years ago. I mean, there are more cameras on the street than there's ever been. Yeah, I mean.
Oh, undoubtedly so. I mean, the reality is, you know, we even receive footage from vehicles that have the ability to capture video. We've been, you know, citizens have shared that type of footage, whether they're driving down a roadway with GoPros or it's just a variety of different, it's clearly a different time. And one thing I would just make clear to the committee is to make sure people understand this is only one phase of any investigation. Just because you see something on film doesn't mean that that's enough to convict someone solely. There's other evidentiary items, there's other things from an investigation. A camera may only tell just really a small portion of the story. It doesn't tell the entire story in different types of incidents. So it's very helpful. It can be fruitful in many regards in identifying individuals who might be involved in certain crimes, but it's not the end to the end all.
And as we have seen in a variety of times, the various angles absolutely matter. You know, it's like I said, in a football game, sometimes it looks like a touchdown, and somebody else says you thought it was. Yeah.
Well, I don't even watch sports replays anymore because I disagree with many of the outcomes. So I'm sure it could be the same in these types of cases as well. So.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to be very clear that with this camera program, there's really no difference between this and existing camera footage. And I think the chief kind of touched on this. If the police decide that they want to retain footage from anyone, they oftentimes approach the individual homeowner or business and ask for that footage. If the person refuses, the police then have an option to actually obtain a warrant for that information. That is no different from this camera footage in this program. So I just want to be very clear, because I know that was one of the things that was touched on when it came to some of the concerns that were addressed about this bill. And regardless of whether a person is purchasing this camera utilizing a rebate voucher program from the county, the reality is that the legal requirements for putting forth that footage remain the same. And I would certainly support in Method 2 regulation that stays the same as existing camera footage is. I don't see a reason why we would change the current requirements, which are a person can voluntarily certainly give footage if they want to, and if not, then the police would need to present a warrant to be able to obtain that footage. And I think that hopefully will be reflected in the Method 2 regulations that come across from the county executive should this bill be enacted.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Were there other issues that we...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next issue related to reimbursable costs under the program, and this is simply to note for the committee that some of the public testimony you received from the Greater Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce noted that there are myriad costs associated with putting in a sophisticated security system. This bill would just allow for the reimbursement of the video cameras themselves. So it's really just kind of pointing out a policy policy decision for the committee of, if you did want to expand the types of things that could be reimbursable, that might allow for some more sophisticated programs to be funded. On the flip side, if you want just, more cameras out there and a more streamlined, kind of easier program to implement, I would think, then that would lend towards leaving the bill as is, where it's just the video cameras themselves that are being reimbursed.
I appreciate it being brought up, but my thought on this one is that we should see, we should walk before we run. I think we should see what type of interest we have, and then take it to another discussion if we have the interest for other areas. But at this point, I believe the idea is to get a camera especially for a business or for an individual that might not be able to afford it, to be able to afford it. That's my thought. I don't know about anybody else. I think we have agreement on that.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So as I said at the beginning, the impetus of this bill was really reflective of some of the folks who are experiencing socioeconomic challenges that prevent them from obtaining these cameras. While I certainly understand and respect the Chamber's view, and that they are also looking at more sophisticated ways in which they can ensure the safety of their patrons as well as the business owners and the employees that work there, our priority should be for making sure that those who are unable to purchase these cameras should be the priority. So I completely agree with you, and that is the real spirit of this bill, was to really reflect the fact that many of our folks in our community just can't afford these, that would help to keep their community safe.
Very good. And what I focused on when you said you completely agree with me, the rest of it I might remember, but I remember that part what you said. I'm kidding. I can't, because this is a picture, I can't see your usual good smile. Anyhow, is there any other comments on this? No? Go ahead, please.
Thanks. I'll just be brief. I think Councilmember Rice summarized it, and I do appreciate the analysis. It was helpful. And I think we're trying to address that through different means, but also acknowledging the reality on the ground. The fact, unfortunately, is that it's communities of color that are being disproportionately impacted by a number of crime issues at a time where the 3rd and 4th police districts have a record number of vacancies. And that's not, unfortunately, going to change anytime soon, although we are all trying to make sure we bring good folks in and address those gaps. And these cameras have become very important in the line of investigations. And not unlike speed cameras or red light cameras, I think taking better advantage of the technology as it becomes available in a manner that is responsible, in a manner that holds with fidelity, ensuring that we assure justice for all, is critical. But that's why I signed on to support this, and the fact that other jurisdictions have done this and implemented it with some degree of success as well is important for us to note. And these cameras can be costly and can be difficult for some to be able to ascertain specifically on their own. So, and it's something that we, like all bills, will have to monitor, and track its success over time to determine whether or not it achieved the goals that we were hoping that it would achieve, but also, seeing if there are any tweaks or changes that need to be made moving forward. So I appreciate this discussion. I think it's been an important one, and I associate myself with all the comments of Councilmember Rice, and I appreciate the memo that he sent out through his team clarifying some of the important points within the legislation.
We've been dealing with so many of these issues for years, particularly in Silver Spring, and I've been a supporter of cameras in many different areas in the past, and still am happy to co-sponsor the bill and appreciate the feedback and the analysis and the comments of Councilmember Rice, and I think we should move forward and pass it.
Very good. And Dr. Thompson?
Sure. I was trying to figure out the time to insert some comments.
Please.
And I appreciate getting background. I'm sorry. Dr. Elaine Bonner Tompkins, Office of Legislative Oversight. I appreciate the comments from the chief as well as from Councilmember Rice that provided some background about how this bill will be implemented, since it's not clear from the text that was introduced about sort of what would be the parameters around video that is captured in cameras that are subsidized or supported by this bill. I wanted to clarify just sort of some findings from our review of the research that I think could help inform the committee's decision. So I think it's important to recognize that when you look at the FBI data and you see that there are disproportionality around Black folks as representatives of the county versus victims of violent crime, there is overrepresentation. About 18% of the population in the county versus 36% of violent crime victimization. But there's also overrepresentation among white residents as well as among Latinx residents. And so I just want to sort of dispel the myth that there's only some groups that are overrepresented. I think the larger issue or concern is sort of the use of cameras as a tool to reduce violent crime, when much of the research that suggests there's any effective role in terms of cameras, in terms of reducing crime, is really around reducing property crime. And the data around that is pretty proportionate for the data points that actually have a race or ethnicity tag. So again, just trying to clarify sort of some of the data that might be driving this. And just the larger issue that I just want to emphasize or put a flag on that's included in our racial equity and social justice statement is that you all as a body have embraced a process to try to create more opportunities for communities and civilians to help shape policing policy with the Policing Advisory Commission, with the recently enacted Police Accountability Board. And of course there are other community groups, including those who responded with testimony who I'm sure want to have a voice in this. And just to try to, I want to recommend a process where either with the bill or the Method 2 regulations or the reporting requirements for this bill, that they be inclusive of a broader set of stakeholders to try to ensure that whatever is implemented is done so equitably.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Tompkins. I'm glad you made that point. And we've discussed this as well. It's sort of organic, but I think moving forward, it would be good for all of us, particularly this next council. We've had two years under our belt of the racial equity analysis work, which has been immensely helpful on so many different levels and truly making an impact. But I've had several pieces of legislation that I proactively had a meeting with you guys before it was introduced, which I thought was productive, just because there sometimes are things in legislation and in writing that don't perfectly capture sort of the context or the background. And I also think that the sheer volume of work that you all have to take on at any given time is not something that we should take lightly. And particularly with Thrive right now, which I know is very much understandably front and center. So this is another important data point moving forward. And I think we've, not surprisingly, have arrived at a great place once again. But it's the constant evolution of this as we get more of these data points, more of this information. I think that will be helpful moving forward. But I appreciate your comments.
And I agree with the council president. We sincerely appreciate everyone looking at things from a different angle, from a different. Everyone comes with a good heart, but sometimes we don't always see what our neighbor sees, and that's what part of this process has been. But with that, I think we're. Oh, please, yeah, I think we're.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make you aware that after Circle 11 of the packet is an addendum, which encloses both the racial equity social justice impact statement and the economic impact statement for the bill. So that is there and publicly available. I also wanted to note, and thank you so much to Dr. Bonner-Tompkins for her remarks. The other issue noted in the addendum just relates to the economic impact statement with a potential amendment for the committee's consideration if you'd like to entertain it, which is just that it would be to require that security cameras to be reimbursed or for a voucher to be used under this program, that the camera be purchased locally. I'm guessing that we don't, fabricate security cameras here in the county. I could be wrong, but just the requirement that you at least have to purchase it from a retailer in the county in order to improve the economic impact outlook. That's a potential for your consideration.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I would just like to say that with again the affordability piece and with websites like Amazon and others that can make it very easy for a person to obtain, I would shy away from this because again it does impact the affordability and accessibility of the types of camera devices. I know that there are big box stores that also sell them as well, so that's but certainly those are corporate profits that while we get tax revenue, keep in mind we get tax revenue whether people order online or not. So from that standpoint, while it's state tax, it may not affect a local business, but I'm not aware of many small local businesses that are in the camera business. And so from that standpoint, typically your residents would go to one of these large retailers or to an online retailer. And so from that perspective, I would shy away from that amendment.
And actually, you took the words out of my mouth. I agree with it. As much as I want everyone to buy as locally as they can, the reality is if you walk into, whether it be a big box retailer or a small retailer, and they don't happen to have it in stock, they're going to order it from someplace outside Montgomery County to get in stock or to ship directly to you. So I think this is something that has to evolve. If we see that this is something that we have a lot of interest in, and then maybe that's the next discussion. But I think we shouldn't put anything in the way of this one at this point. And, where my colleagues are, I think we're in agreement. Anything else? Well, with that, by acclamation, are we good? Thank you very much, and we appreciate all your hard work. And we will adjourn this meeting. And thank you, Councilmember Rice, for being with us. Thanks. And with that, we're adjourned.